I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today we're going to continue on our journey with Tao Te Ching, starting from chapter 28. Know one's masculinity, protect one's femininity, and one becomes a conduit for the world. Being a conduit for the world, never leaving your virtue, return to childlikeness. Know white, protect black, and one sets a precedent for the world. Always virtuous without erring, return to the limitless. No glory, protect shame, and one becomes a valley of the world. Being a valley of the world, always sufficient in virtue, return to being like raw wood in its simplicity. Be a precedent for the world. The raw wood, when split, becomes a tool the wise person can use to be the chief official of a great administration that uses no violence. Even as we know our masculine side, we should not abandon our feminine side, and I imagine Lao Tzu will agree this also holds vice versa. The yin-yang shines through in this chapter 28, where Lao Tzu contrasts two sides and how knowing both, one becomes a conduit for the world. We are a channel in which the river of reality flows within us, from which the world can drink from. He admonishes us to be that conduit, to hold onto our virtue, and to return to childlike simplicity. To know the white and yet not abandon the black, to know glory and yet not abandon shame, we should not discard one for the other, not favor one over the other, but realize that both sides are needed to make us whole. The world seems to want to have only one side, but as we know from chapter 2, one side cannot subsist in its one-sidedness. The one who realizes that both sides are codependent is the wise person. He then sets a precedent others can recognize and learn from, since he has demonstrated through his own example that this balance of both sides in oneself can be done. Maintaining and persisting in one's virtue is the way to the eternal Tao. Lao Tzu tells us that one who achieves the balance of yin-yang is a valley of the world, seemingly empty but a necessary path carved by nature for the waters to flow, a conduit that feeds the world with the life-sustaining waters of virtue. The valley is sufficient in its virtue with its streams of water and trees. The raw wood of trees is simple, but full of potential when cut and crafted by woodworkers into all sorts of tools. Likewise, simplicity can be crafted into tools the wise person can use to rule without violence. Chapter 29. Anyone who desires to obtain the world through action will not get it. The world is a divine vessel unobtainable by action or grasping. The actor will fail. The grasper will lose his grip. Some things lead, some things follow. Some exhale slowly, some blow. Some are strong, some weak. Some toil, some destroy. Therefore, the wise person avoids extremes, extravagance, and complacency. If you want something, you have to go out there and make it happen, is the usual line that we have been fed. But Lao Tzu tells us that that is not the way. Through self-serving action and grasping, we may be able to obtain some things, but we will never be able to obtain the world. What does obtain the world mean? Perhaps we can make it simpler, to simply obtain everything we want. We cannot even obtain all the things we want, because when we get one thing, we lose another. For instance, one who has gained great learning may lose his simplicity. One who has gained great wealth may lose his humility or even humanity. The world is the divine vessel of the Tao, and to think that we can obtain it through our self-serving acts or desires is the height of hubris. Some things lead, some things follow, writes Lao Tzu. It is not that the one who leads is better than the one who follows. Leaders need followers to follow their lead. Followers need leaders to follow. An army with only generals will fail. A company with only the chief executive cannot function. A school with only the principal will have no one teaching. The wise person realizes that the strong and the weak are both essential parts of reality. So she favors neither, avoiding these extremities, adopting what Buddha calls the middle way. She will neither be extravagant nor complacent, but remain simple and humble. Chapter 30. One who uses the Tao to advise the Lord will counsel against military force to strengthen the kingdom. Such a course has good returns. Where armies camp, thorny plants spring up. After raising great armies, years of famine are inevitable. A virtuous ruler attains his goal, then stops, not daring to take more by force. He attains the goal without bragging, attains the goal without pride, attains the goal when it cannot be avoided, attains the goal without force. Things that become strong also become old, but that is not the way of Tao. What is not the way of Tao will soon cease. Expanding a country's power through military force is a bad idea according to Lao Tzu, because the army lays waste to its campgrounds and the efforts to sustain it, such as high taxation and the conscription of the common people, lead to famine. Instead, a good ruler should accomplish his goals and then stop and not keep grasping for more. He should attain his goals only because he cannot avoid it, for instance, to defend his country, and should not use violence, for instance, negotiating with other countries for resources or through trade. He should not brag or be proud when his goals are achieved, since that will incur the wrath or envy of other countries. Growth leading to strength also leads to decadence and decline, though this can be avoided by avoiding being too strong. Instead, as Lao Tzu tells us in Chapter 3, meeting the nutritional needs of the people, keeping them and things simple, and acting with restraint leaves nothing ungoverned. Chapter 31. The military is an inauspicious tool. All things detest them, therefore the follower of the Tao does not use them. The gentleman at home honors the left, but when using weapons, honor the right. The wielder of weapons is using inauspicious tools, which are not the tools of the gentleman. The gentleman only resorts to them when it cannot be avoided, prizing peace and placidity. He does not consider victory beautiful, since those who do are those who delight over murder. Those who delight over murder must not be allowed to fulfill their worldly ambitions. The left position is prized for happy occasions, the right for sad occasions. The assistant general's place is on the left, the commander-in-chief on the right, like in funeral rites. When multitudes are killed, we weep with grief. Victory in battle should be handled like funeral rites. The use of the military brings bad fortune, at least as this chapter 30 tells us, when used in expansion, that is, in attack. Lao Tzu says that all things detest war. Is that right? The aggressor may seem to love war until it in turn is attacked. Lao Tzu does concede that there are conditions where the use of the military is needed, and that is the only time they should be used by the gentleman, that is, by a noble person. The noble person prefers peace and stillness. Even when he wins, it is not a wonderful thing since people were murdered, both his own people and those of his enemies, but people nonetheless and murder nonetheless. People who do delight in murder must be prevented from taking power. War is a tragedy, even for the victor. Chapter 32. The Tao never has a name. As simple as raw wood and as insignificant, yet there is none in the world that can master it. If princes and king can abide with it, all things will pay homage to them. Heaven and earth will unite, dripping sweet nectar, and the people will need no one to command them as they are able to self-harmonize. When creation began, names were needed. When a thing is already named and hence differentiated from other things, humankind must know to stop naming, to stop further differentiating things from one another. Knowing when to stop avoids danger. The Tao's relation to the world is analogous to the streams from the valleys flowing into the rivers and the seas. This chapter 32 is an elaboration of chapter 1. The Tao is ephemeral, no one can control it. It is simple, yet hard to abide by. If it can be abided with, a paradise will have been created with abundance, and people who can rule themselves, achieving a utopian anarchy. Though the Tao has no name, we nonetheless gave it a name because we need to differentiate between things, which is the reason why names arise. Yet once everything is named, we need to stop differentiating more and more finely between things. At one point, the burgeoning nomenclature will cease to be useful, and then we should stop, for a continuous focus on difference can mask similarity, leading to confusion rather than elucidation, which is the point of naming things to begin with. Names is probably a placeholder for knowledge. Once we already gain the knowledge that we require to live harmoniously with nature, we should stop. The further development of knowledge beyond that point will probably lead to a perversion in its use, which leads to danger. The Tao's relation to the world is analogous to the streams from the valleys flowing into the rivers and seas, writes Lao Tzu. What is the relation between mountain streams and rivers and seas? The streams are what feed into the rivers, which then feed into the sea. Those streams seem less significant compared to the vastness of the rivers and seas. They are the source. Without streams, there would be no rivers and seas. Similarly, the Tao is the source of heaven, earth, and all things. In comparison to them, the Tao seems simple and insignificant. Yet, it is precisely this simplicity and emptiness that makes possible all existence. What is the only creature that names things? It is human beings. We even name what has no name, but that is no surprise, since it is us who gives things names. Things in themselves have no names. Lao Tzu talks about following the course of nature, but are not human action and desires also part of nature? The opposite of natural is man-made, artificial. The etymology of man-made is in the phrase, what is made by human beings, which does not exist until made by human beings. The root of artificial is art. While art more commonly refers to the aesthetic in the forms of paintings and sculptures, these paintings and sculptures are called art because they are made by the artifice of human beings. Art is artificial. Without human beings, there would be no paintings or sculptures, no art. Human beings seem to be the only beings that can defy nature. The lion eating the lamb is just acting according to its nature, making that act in accord with the Tao. Creating the artificial is likewise part of the nature of human beings. We are by nature creative, with our opposable thumbs enabling us to manufacture. The word manufacture comes from the Latin manufactum, to make by hand. If all this is hence natural, even the manufacture of unnatural artifacts, what then are Lao Tzu's admonitions directed at? If everything that exists, exists naturally, then is not everything already on the Tao? Lao Tzu presumably did not feel the need to write a Tao Te Ching addressed towards animals, plants, or non-living things, because they are always on the Tao. They are always in keeping with their nature, always following the laws of nature. It is only human beings with our higher level of consciousness, of mind, that can purportedly defy nature. But is this defiance really a defiance of nature, or is our defiance of nature natural, the way our nature is, and hence in keeping with the Tao. Clearly, Lao Tzu makes an implicit distinction between nature and humankind, the way many thinkers throughout the history of thought do. We are a part of nature, yet there seems to be some things within us that makes us distinct from the rest of nature. Some of these speculations include a superior intellect from our faculty of reason, according to Aristotle, or our God-given human spirit that puts us above all of nature, according to the Abrahamic religions. Friedrich Nietzsche tells us that the will to power is in our essence the way the lion preys on the lamb, and yet we restrain our nature by adopting a slave morality. Martin Heidegger says that we are the kind of beings for which being is a problem facing no other beings other than human beings. Georges Bataille writes, "Sexual reproductive activity is common to sexual animals and men, but only men appear to have turned their sexual activity into erotic activity." He adds that we invent sexual taboos to distance ourselves from our animality. Others question whether there exists such a distinction, such as Diogenes of Sinope, who mocked Plato with a plucked chicken since it meets Plato's definition of man as a featherless biped. However, let us broadly agree that it is our minds that distinguish human beings from all other living creatures. The teachings of the Tao is to follow our nature, but if our nature is to then be self-serving, to self-assert, to strive, to make the artificial, then does Lao Tzu's teaching of Wu Wei, to not self-assert in our actions and to be simple, contradict his teachings on following nature? John Paul Sartre argues that there is no preordained human nature, that we each have the freedom to decide what our individual natures are. Existence precedes essence, he writes. You are free, so choose. In other words, invent. If the essence of our nature is not featherless bipedalism, or even intellect and reason, but is instead freedom as the existentialists such as Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir contends, then Lao Tzu's teachings do not contradict itself. Lao Tzu points out what human nature is like. In his descriptions of the wise and best people, the human being is virtuous, not quarrelsome, is empty and cares for others, and his soul. He also describes the self-serving, the grasping, the self-aggrandizing, the arrogant, the murderer and warmonger, the controlling and the violent. Both sets of characteristics describe various members of the human species, and even the same person. For Lao Tzu to even admonish his readers to do this and not that, he obviously assumes we have free will. Perhaps how this puzzle can be resolved is that while he recognizes that our nature is flexible and spans a spectrum of behaviors, he wants us to choose our better nature, which is more in keeping with the primal and eternal Tao. Like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Lao Tzu may be thinking that our fundamental nature is good but has become corrupted by society, as opposed to Thomas Hobbes, who thinks that human beings in their primal condition is in a state of war of every man against every man. Why else write a book that makes suggestions on how one should live and how a society should be organized if there was no free will to choose to live and organize ourselves in that way? I contend that any thinker that writes a book on ethics must implicitly believe in free will, because if there was no other way than for things to unfold deterministically, then what is the use of persuading otherwise? Spinoza and Arthur Schopenhauer are just two philosophers that commit this mistake. Lao Tzu, if he recognizes freedom as fundamental to and constitutive of human nature, which I argue he does by the very act of writing about ethics and politics, hence escapes this paradox. Chapter 33. One who knows other people is wise, while one who knows himself is enlightened. The victor has force, while one who conquers himself is strong. One who knows contentment is rich. One who perseveres has willpower. One who holds one's ground endures. one who dies but does not perish is immortal. Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, says that the one who knows himself and his enemy in fighting 100 battles will win 100 battles. Lao Tzu is slightly older than Sun Tzu, and his words on this have a more profound wisdom. Wisdom is knowing other people. Enlightenment is knowing ourselves. It may be more difficult to know ourselves than to know others, since we have difficulty viewing ourselves objectively. We may find it difficult to be honest with ourselves about our flaws and also our merits. When we act, we have to believe that we are acting in a correct way, because we may otherwise lack the confidence to act. Hence, it is not easy to be self-aware. Lao Tzu is saying that we need to begin with ourselves to become better versions of ourselves, that true strength is to conquer ourselves and not others. Song Changxing names 10 kinds of this internal strength: the strength of faith, charity, morality, devotion, meditation, concentration, illumination, wisdom, the Tao, and virtue. Wu Cheng points out that Lao Tzu has been teaching simplicity and weakness over wisdom and strength throughout the Tao Te Ching, but clarifies that in this chapter 33, Lao Tzu's prescription for wisdom and strength is for dealing with the inside. Simple-mindedness and weakness are for dealing with the outside. Towards ourselves, we need wisdom and strength to rein in our passions and desires and to be virtuous, while towards external things, we need to handle them with simplicity so as not to arouse our internal desires, and flexibility in order to overcome the external factors. The contented person is rich regardless of how little wealth he actually possesses, while the discontented person is not rich regardless of how much wealth he possesses. As Lao Tzu tells us in chapter 9 and chapter 32, we need to know when enough is enough. To go beyond that point is burdensome and debilitating, be it in the accumulation of wealth or knowledge. Wang Peng points out that the natural endowment of all things is complete in itself. Poverty does not reduce it, wealth does not enlarge it. But fools abandon this treasure to chase trash. Those who know contentment pay the world no heed. This is true wealth. Zhao Cong writes, outside, be content with your lot. Inside, focus on the way. As we persevere in our pursuit of the Tao, we advance closer to it. As Lao Tzu outlined in chapter 16, to hold our ground in following the Tao leads to enlightenment and immortality, as opposed to ceding our ground by following the way of the world, which leads to death and reincarnation. Chapter 34. The Great Tao is all-pervading, covering both left and right. All things depend on it for existence and not to perish. It accomplishes its work without claiming credit, clothes and nourishes all things without being their master. Ever desireless, it may be considered small. Though all things return to it, it does not rule them. It may be considered great. Through the Tao not making itself great, it accomplishes great things. We have been already told about the all-pervasiveness of the Tao and how all things ultimately come from it. Here in chapter 34, Lao Tzu adds that all things depend on it. It sustains the existence of all things, but it does so without taking credit for it, without ruling them, the same way we are told to deal with things, to work for them but not claim credit or own them. Because it has no desire, it seems small, the way a person who wants little has little possessions. But because it is magnanimous, it is great. Since it has no desires, it also does not desire compensation despite its work. Hence, because it is small, in not having desires of its own, it is great in serving all things without claiming compensation. Chapter 35. The world seeks the one who grasps the great image of the Tao. They seek without causing trouble, with great contentment and peace. Music and cakes entice the passing traveller to stop by. Yet the Tao, when spoken of, is bland and flavourless, not satisfying to look at, not satisfying to listen to, but when used, one cannot get enough of it. The world desires a master to guide them towards the Tao, and they seek her through peaceful ways. However, they are easily enticed by sensory delights, while the Tao does not provide such pleasures. It gives a different kind of satisfaction. There is the satisfaction of acting free of self-serving desires, and yet leaving nothing undone, which has been much reiterated throughout the Tao Te Ching. There is also the satisfaction of knowing the true nature of reality, of knowing eternity and becoming enlightened. Chapter 36. What can shrink must surely be expanded before. What can be weak must surely be stronger before. What can be despoiled must surely be flourishing before. What can be taken must surely be given before. This is called dimming the bright. The soft overcomes the hard. The weak overcomes the soft. Fish cannot leave the deep. The best stools of the state should not be revealed to people. In chapter 30, Lao Tzu tells us that what has become strong is said to at some point decline. A candle burning bright will burn itself out eventually. The way of the Tao is not to overcome obstacles with strength, but through yielding and flexibility, through softness and weakness. The way grass that bends will not be uprooted by strong winds, while the strong tree with a thick trunk risks being broken due to its resistance. For the best tools of the state to be most effective, they may have to be hidden from the public's view, the way fishes thrive when hidden in the water. If revealed to the public, they may cause worry and confusion to the people, since their purposes may be poorly understood or misunderstood. This may be read as illiberal in our times, since transparency is considered a hallmark of good government. But even now, not all is transparent either. Thus, the weight of the responsibility for such tools has to be borne by the leaders entrusted with their knowledge and use. As in chapter 26, the leaders should not take this responsibility lightly. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor, and I'll come back next week with yet another part of the Tao Te Ching.